Well, it's quite complicated. We lived in a suburb of Vienna called Schwechat, and they discovered not so many years ago that the airport in Schwechat had been built over what had been a sub-camp of Mauthausen, again, of a labor camp. And a young group of Austrian archaeologists became quite obsessed by this. And they tried to find mass graves and went into the whole history of this suburb of Vienna and talked to people who had survived the war. And they discovered that I was the only person, the only Jew who survived from that suburb of Vienna. It wasn't a very Jewish suburb, but I mean there had been, I think, a dozen families, and they had all been annihilated, and I was the only one left. And he got in touch, the leader of this group got in touch with me and found me. And they found me through Gertie, because I had written to Gertie by then. I had found her, and I had told her that I had been to Mauthausen. And she told them that I had been to Mauthausen, and they traced me through Mauthausen, through the registers at Mauthausen of people who visited or been interested. And that's how they traced me. But I got hold of Gertie before that, because it's a long story, but the people who had the flat next to us where we lived in Schwechat were lovely Christian family, and they were very close to us. And after the war, they found us in England. They came to visit us, and it was through them that I discovered that this school friend Gertie was still around in Schwechat. It's, you know, a long, complicated story, but we found each other, and I'm still in touch with these 4 young archaeologists. They're wonderful people, and they've kind of made me feel better about Austria. Perfect what?
That is the intent.
Well, they say that 10 is the cut-off time, that if you come here as 10 or younger, you can learn the language properly, but that if you are over 10, you will never quite lose an accent. So I was lucky. I was lucky anyway.
You seem to be full of hope, compassion, love. I find that incredible. From the horrors you've seen as a child, how did you become so compassionate and not have anger?
Well, the 4 Austrians, these 4 young Austrians have helped me a lot. They really have. They're such good people, and they're thoroughly Austrians. So they have really helped me. My parents were wonderful people, compassionate. I mean, my mother would never even set foot in Austria again, so they were not forgiving, actually. She wouldn't even change planes in Austria. She was once supposed to go somewhere where she was supposed to change planes in Vienna, and she wouldn't go because she wasn't going to change planes in Vienna. But they apart from that, they certainly brought me up not to be angry.
It's amazing because what's going on in the world at the moment, personally, I'm finding it difficult not to be angry. And I haven't seen the horrors that you've seen. So any advice people should...
Well, you know, how lucky was I? I didn't see the horrors, you know. The most horrible thing I saw was old people scrubbing pavements. I didn't see the horrors. And, you know, I always say to people, I'm not a Holocaust survivor. I'm a refugee.
Did your father ever get back to law?
No. In order to become a lawyer in this country, he would have to have studied for years because it's a different law. English law is based on precedent and Austrian law is based on the Roman law. So it was a completely different thing. He did 1 year, but then he found that he had to look after a family and he couldn't spend 3 more years studying. And he joined the Pioneer Corps. He was interned, then he joined the Pioneer Corps, and he was always very conscious of the fact that he was on 2 opposite sides in 2 world wars, and therefore thought that wars were not a good thing. And he did all sorts of jobs after the war to begin with, and then he got in with a firm of solicitors, and he became the costing clerk of this firm of solicitors, and he was revered. He was called Dr. Schnabel, which pleased him tremendously, and he was valued. He was the eminence grise of the firm. Everybody came to ask his advice and his opinion, etc. And he stayed there for the rest of his life, and he didn't retire until he was 85. And he just loved it, and he never, ever complained. I never, ever, in all my life, heard my father complain about anything. And he went on playing chess. Great lifesaver chess.
Can I ask you, you said that there were 3 stipulations
Yeah.
that you had to go as a domestic, and you had to have £50 and a sponsor, and you had to sign a form saying you wanted to go to America.
Yeah.
Was that all from stipulated by the British government?
Yes, very much so. And then of course we couldn't go to America when our number came up because the war had come, and you couldn't travel. And then we were allowed to stay in England.
I was just going to say, you mentioned at one point that he was a butler, he had to be a domestic.
Yeah.
Was he a butler for anybody famous or?
No, butler for a horrible family. They were not good to us. They paid my parents no salary. I was their salary, the fact that I could live with them. They were told that was the salary. They had 4 children who bullied me, who were really not nice at all. But I was so happy because I was in the school. The village school was just wonderful. I'll tell you a story about the village school. The headmaster was called Mr. Brew. And Mr. Brew was very, very kind. And when it came to what was then the scholarship exam, when I was at the end of what's now year 6, and we had to take papers home for our parents to sign if we were going to take the scholarship exam, because there were implications. They might have to pay for the place, etc. So I took this 11+ papers home, or whatever they were called, for my mother to sign. My father was already interned, and my mother really couldn't speak English at all. So she went to the lady of the house and said, you know, the lady of the house could speak German actually, what is this and what am I to do with this paper? And the lady of the house said, it's not for people like you. You don't have to worry about her going to a grammar school. She'll just go to the secondary school. That's what they were like. And she used to say to people who came for dinner, and my mother was always very amused because the war came, of course, and they used to dress up for dinner, full evening clothes at dinner, and then have scrambled eggs on toast. And, which always used to amuse my mother. But they used to say to the guests, oh, and this is our new butler, you know, he used to be a lawyer. They were pretty awful. And I've made 2 attempts to go back, because I was asked to go back to the school and speak to the children a couple of years ago. And I tried to go back to the manor house just to see where I had lived. And they wouldn't let me in. They wouldn't let me in. It's still the same family. They didn't want to know.
Whereabouts in England was this?
In Hertfordshire, in a little village called Weston, which is quite near Stevenage, Letchworth, that area, Hitchin.
What's the family?
It's the manor. It's the manor house.
Was the family anti-Semitic, or was the family actually anti-Semitic, or were they just?
Sorry,
Was the family anti-Semitic, or were they just very stuck up and rude?
sorry, can you tell me?
The family that your father was butler for, were they actually in any way anti-Semitic, or was it just that they were rude and snobbish and whatever else? I mean, that they treated your family so badly?
Sorry,
The-
tell me.
Was the family anti-Semitic, or were they just totally stuck up?
Oh, I don't think they knew what a Jew was. I don't think they'd ever met a Jew. I don't think they were anti-Semitic particularly. They were just snobbish, awful. Nouveau riche, my mother used to say.
So you said your father was interned? You said your father was a butler, but you said your father was interned over here? Or did I mishear you?
Your father was interned.
Yes. He was the butler, and then when the war came, about 6 months, or not even that, I don't know how many months, but after the start of the war, Churchill said, collar the lot, and all Austrian and German citizens were interned, no matter whether they were Jews or Nazis, they were interned together. And then he got out of internment by joining the Pioneer Corps, being on opposite side in the Second World War from where he'd been in the First World War. And then from the Pioneer Corps, I mean, after the war, he started doing odd jobs in solicitors' offices and then got this job that he stayed with for the rest of his life. And my mother worked in hospitality, not as a domestic servant, but in hotels and things, in various positions, but she worked all her life. And my mother never recovered. My mother stopped living really. She just went through the motions. She never recovered from the loss of her family. Whereas my father went on playing chess.
And what happened to you? Did you go to university?
No, I didn't go to university. I became a social worker. They say that people who have been persecuted can go in one of 3 ways. They can either remain victims all their life, or they can become persecutors, or they can become rescuers. And my family and I are all rescuers. I have 2 daughters. One of them is sitting there. I have 2 daughters, and they both are therapists. They're both rescuers, and I was a social worker, and my grandchildren work for charities.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
How is it you found out what happened to your husband and his family?
Yeah, well, yes, after the war, the Red Cross collected all the documentation that the Nazis kept. I mean, I know it sounds ridiculous, but they kept documents, they documented everything they did. I have documents that tells me exactly when Bobby went from one camp to another camp, the day he was liberated, when he died. Everything is documented. And the Red Cross took all this over, and if you applied to the Red Cross after the war, and as long as you had the names and the ages and where they came from, they could trace them, and they could tell you everything that you needed to know. And nowadays, the Wiener Library has the documentation about everything that happened to everybody.
You can get lots of information from the Memorial de la Shoah in Paris. The right to live there, find information for you, which I did too, find out about some of my relatives.
I'll tell you another little story about my father, the butler. Even when the war started, this family had a delivery from Harrods every week of cake, a coffee cake and a chocolate cake every week. And they were strictly not for the servants. There were very clear rules about what servants could and could not do, and there was a baize door in between us that we couldn't go through except when my father was serving. So very strict rules, and of course no cake for the servants. But my judicious father, my father who was a lawyer and who lived by the law and by everything that was right, used to cut me a piece of chocolate cake every single week.
There's some over there. Make sure you get some.
I've had some.
How did your family find your Jewish community, your identity? Were there other Jews located locally, other refugees, or...?
They remained very isolated all their lives, my parents. They never found a Jewish community. They lived in Coventry, they lived in Sheffield, they moved around, but mainly they lived in Loughborough. And they never connected. Now, whether that was because they felt so alien that, I don't know. But it wasn't really till I was an adult and when they were no longer alive that I realized how isolated they were, how alien they always felt.
Thank you. I think chocolate cake was the one before last question, which is the note to end on, isn't it? Something sweet. But really, I mean, in some ways, as Sasha was saying, with such difficult beginnings actually to tell such a sweet story and somehow one of hope as well. We were reflecting how my grandparents were younger than your parents, but older than you. My mother, their daughter, was born here. So when you're saying you don't know why your parents are as they are, I guess it's a reminder again that every story is different and we don't know why. And on a day like today, when we remember 6 million, there are 6 million stories untold, and we do what we can to tell those stories.
And you see, they were secular Jews. And secular Jews in Vienna meant something quite different to here, because they were They were part of the intelligentsia of Vienna, you know. They went to concerts and to art galleries, and they did all the things that cultured people do, and they had a lot of friends and family that did the same. That's what they did. They were not at all religious, and in fact, I didn't have or know about Hanukkah till after the Anschluss, when my father said, right, this is the time we actually become and show we're Jewish. And we didn't have a Hanukkah, but he found again a board, and he knocked nails through it from underneath, 9 nails. And then he stuck the candles on them every day. And he said to me, that's Hanukkah. And he knew the Baruch. He could sing it. He goes, God knows from where, from studying Judaism, I suppose. I don't know. And
Door by door, from generation to generation.
yeah, suddenly there was Hanukkah. And we have Hanukkah as a family every year.
So again, thank you from everyone. I think we stand and say thank you again.